talk to people.
My wife used to say, it's
Okay.
closer to you,
Do that all day.
closer to it.
And
It's confusing, and
I
I
can
find
bring
so
up
many
minutes,
people,
stuff like that.
Yeah.
I can't.
because I tell people at my age, we're gonna see a lot of friends. It's just unfortunate, I don't know how, unless you're one of the lucky ones that go first, get out of the way.
Hi Nils, this is Sue and the rest of the committee.
How do you do?
And I think we're gonna call the meeting to order at 7:05.
Okay.
Whoops, I have to turn it.
Would it be worth doing introductions so that Nils knows who's here?
Yes,
Okay.
okay.
Hi Nils, Rich is here, Rich Brown.
Earl Stroud, Mills.
Chris Ramsden.
Dave Schaefer.
Mike Smith.
Jennifer Boylston, Emily Blanchard,
Dan Brand.
Phil Bardo.
Ray Clark. John Stadler.
Okay, can you hear that all right, Nils?
Yeah.
Good. Our new toy is working.
That's a good toy.
Yes, call to order at 7:05, approval of the minutes from 3:14.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Whoa, nice. Okay, there are some copies of the charge. We did change it slightly. We changed it from businesses to development, making it more generic and not as specific toward businesses, but more open. Range. One of the things we need to talk about is the some issues concerning the planning board has with this committee. And apparently, at the last meeting last Thursday, they were very upset with what we're doing and would like us to make some changes. Kevin is the new man, the new guy in town, and he decided that he wanted to try and be a facilitator and try to coordinate things and see if we can't get the planning board and the LCDC to work together in a more cohesive fashion to accomplish our common goals.
Which Kevin is this?
Kevin Sarr, the new select board member.
Oh, okay. How do you spell his last name?
S-A-H-R.
Very thoughtful and organized person.
He's doing his best to organize us, but it's real bunch
Good
of,
deal.
like, kind of like a bunch of cats. And,
Well, I think he probably is capable of doing
yeah, okay.
Looking forward to meeting him.
So the question was asked, what does the planning board want to work with, does the planning board want to work with the LCDC? And the answer was unanimously, yes, they do want to work with us. So what is required by the development committee via work direction from the select board to achieve alignment with the planning board? So this is what Kevin presented to us this morning. Number one was to eliminate the redundancy with visioning, which shall remain with the planning board. Let me read through all of them and then we can take them one by one.
Yeah, good,
Huh? Okay. Development committee provides research and input into the master plan via the select board and the planning board. The development committee needs more scoping and definition by the select board and the planning board. Acknowledge charge as described in number 3, and I don't know what number 3 is, because I don't have a form that has a number 3 on it, so I'm not sure what that is, but anyway. Understand clearer roles and responsibilities. The development committee and planning board should conduct joint meetings on a regular schedule. And the development committee schedule driven. So,
I think that's number 3 is down there, I think that's what it is. This is
this is,
the project. I think that's what he's referring to, but.
that's the RFP.
I think he's referring to that.
Okay, was that on the RFP, is that what, do you know, John?
No.
Okay.
It was originally the project description on the RFP.
To determine,
Number three.
develop information about the demographics and tax base of Lyme, to
Yep.
conduct a visioning process for Lyme residents.
Mhm.
The visioning process would involve conducting 2 or 3 meetings. Okay, I see, yeah. Residents at the elementary school, which people can express opinions about the appropriateness of Lyme tax bases, etc.
You wanna keep that?
No, it's all right, sure, I've got it somewhere. So how does the committee feel? Earl, you want to say something?
You know, I think I said at the top, and repeat it and try to, I mean, you ran through
Okay,
a list of things.
so the first one was eliminate redundancy with visioning, which should remain with the planning board.
Which I think legally is the correct move. I know there's a question on it, but I think it's where it should be.
Are you comfortable with the time frame that they're talking about?
We haven't,
Who's speaking?
we can certainly.
Mike and Chris are talking.
I'm
Okay.
sorry, I should say, this is Mike Smith speaking, that I feel that that's a point we can talk about. I think that we're referring, I believe you're referring to what I heard was that it would take 2 or 3 years to
Correct.
work through.
Yep.
And that's a point that I think that the 2 groups should talk about.
About 2 or 3 years is a long time. And if
Well,
we're
it's
really
not-
trying to get some things done and open up a variety of doors, you know, that seems like a tremendous time period. I'm sorry, Nels, it's Chris Ramsden.
Right, and this is Rich, and I wanna say that, in planning circles, information that's more than 2 years old, is viewed as as no longer terribly reliable. And so, to allow a 2-year period to pass, as we think about this, I think causes us not to have good information. So, I would be very, would be enthusiastic about having a shorter schedule.
I think we should put it on the table as something that we should try and work out.
Good, I agree.
That was Mike Smith, sorry.
Who are you talking to?
Nils Johnson is on the speakerphone.
Oh,
Yeah, you know, forgive me, but I'm a businessman, and my instincts are always to get her done. When we had our joint meeting with the planning board, there was a comment about, well, this is gonna take 3 or 4 years. The old master plan, I think, is the last visioning that was done was, the master plan is what, 12 years old, John?
2006.
No,
12
the
years.
master plan is 2013. The visioning, can I speak?
Yes,
Yeah. The
this is John
visioning,
Stadler.
the visioning was done between 2006 and 2008. I wasn't involved in that. Can you hear me, Niels?
Yes.
Okay. I wasn't involved in that. I came on towards the very end. And so this is wisdom that was passed down to me. That process ended up taking, I don't know whether it was, you know, it was 2000 to 2008. I don't know, was it 2 years, was it 3 years? It took an incredibly long time. What I was told the reason was because the first part of the process was rushed. So that what people hoped to get done in the first year was not accepted by the town. They got a lot of pushback, and it ended up taking an extra 2 years. after those 2 years elapsed, and there was finally information, were about, and again, I can't say exactly what the numbers were, but there were about, I started on the board somewhere around then. And there was tremendous turnover on the board. And by the time there was enough stability of membership on the board, there was already like 6 years passed from the beginning of that process. So I think you have to take in the realistic human element in all of this. You can push the timeline, but you're probably will get very strong pushback. I'm saying that as something that was experienced.
Who are we gonna get pushback from?
From the town, from the people who were dissatisfied with the process, very dissatisfied, and felt like they were being led instead of them being at the head. And I also think that when you put too much of a time limit, or whatever the phrase you want to use on it, is you'll get less quality work. You know, if you have a consultant and you say, I want this done, why don't you ask the consultant what a reasonable timeline would be, so that the consultant is comfortable with the timeline? Because if you're gonna define a very rigid timeline for a consultant, the consultant will do your work. But again, I think you'll get a lower quality work than you might otherwise if the consultant feels comfortable with getting the timeline that they can get the work done properly.
For clarification,
Can I respond to that?
certainly, Nils, go ahead.
Okay, first of all, I've done one of these in Ohio, as I expressed in our joint meeting, where I say I, but our committee out here did one. We moved it forward in, a year or less. Worked with a team of consultants from the university, but they were pros. Came up with a good result. There was massive community buy-in. Everybody was very happy, and so I guess I disagree with what you're saying, John. And as to push back, I think what my sense in town is that people are pushing to deal with the crushing taxes. And
I'm sorry, with what?
So,
Taxes.
Okay.
So, I want to make it clear, I don't think any of us has come to any conclusions except that we need to go out and survey the town in some type of reasonable fashion as quickly as possible and see what everybody thinks. I don't think the consultant, I talked with Stuart Arnett, I expressed before, don't know him from the Philippines, but he did Lebanon's work, and I think most of us have seen the report that was prepared there. I don't believe the quality is going to be less or more. I think if you hire the right guy, it's going to be fine. Somebody like that, but he doesn't have to be the only guy, obviously, without an RFP, but somebody wanted, well, let's get a grant, and so that puts you in a whole different procedure that you've got to meet certain deadlines, and then you got to report in here, and there's annual funding, and this can be done, and we can get it done by midsummer, and I think it'll be just fine, and I think people will feel that they've had a chance to participate and have their say. I don't think quality is going to be an issue.
Just for clarification, John, are you talking the full master plan or just the visioning process?
I'm not quite.
When you were talking about how long it took, how many years it took, were you talking about developing?
The 3 years was the visioning and survey process.
Took 3 years.
Yeah. Well, 2006 to 2008. I don't know the exact starting dates on, but
Generally.
it covered 3 years.
Yeah, I don't quite understand
why, you know, I have no idea what happened in the past, but why would we think that there would be pushback as long as we were open and gave people advance notice and encouraged people to come and participate? Why would there be pushback from that? Why do we need to, you know, to expand the timeline to a year or two? How that would be any more acceptable to the town than anything else? I think the key to me is just making sure that it's open and encourage folks to come and to have several opportunities for their voices to be heard, and that we don't go in with a preordained agenda, that we go in with an open mind and say, we're here, we want you to come and help us, and that to me has always been the key, and I've done a ton of social science research, survey, things like that. It's always, the key is always making sure people are known, it's known that they're wanted and you're open to their ideas is always the key. It has nothing to do with timing that I ever saw, so.
John?
Yeah, that's fine, if you can do it, then, you know, more power to you, that'd be great.
I do like your idea about, I think we do need to have a sit down when we find a consultant and say, what is a reasonable timeline? I think
Yeah.
that's the idea.
And getting back to something Neil's touched on, which is, you know, about the whole tax issue. And what's the most recent RFP is the one on the 20th, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so, you know, I was looking at that, and one thing, I think that, well, I mean, just giving you my opinion, that is missing from this whole discussion and the way that what was it called, the study, anyway, the issues that were covered in there.
Well, I don't wanna start to
Well,
get down this
the-
RFP
this-
level, let's just finish this discussion first, and then we'll get to the.
Okay, okay.
That's on there as well. So, what, are you open to having this committee work with you on developing the visioning process and having us move ahead?
Well, let me, I mean, I know you already know this, but I'll say this for everybody else's knowledge. The planning board is already working on the master plan, and that's been part of the whole difficulty in this process. We are already working on the master plan, we have been for a time. We're working on the housing chapter, the first housing chapter, as far as I know, that's what I've been told, first housing chapter ever for Lyme, and it was something we promised at the end of the last master plan process, which ended in 2013. The public that stuck with us to the end was very helpfully critical and wanted more of a focus on housing. And the whole process had taken so long that we decided in that group to do rolling chapters, which we're allowed to do under statute in New Hampshire, so that we wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel every time and go through what had happened the time before. So we're doing a housing chapter, and that, I think, I'm speaking for myself, inevitably leads to visioning and survey or some combination of both. So once you all were charged, that was a big problem for us, because we're already going down the path of doing a master plan chapter, and it involves visioning, and it involves feedback from the town. And I think it's really unfortunate to have two things going on at once, and things that are gonna cause a lot of confusion, and where we're gonna be double dipping in the town. And that is a large part of the problem here.
Speaking personally and as a member of the board, and feeling a tremendous amount of pressure about our tax increases. And sitting where I'm sitting, I'm kind of caught between the devil and the deep blue sea here. We have to fund the town and fund our projects. At the same time, I'm looking at my ability to pay taxes, and it is a crunch. And I don't have 5 or 6 years for this process to play out. So I'm saying that there is pressure, a tremendous amount of pressure, to move and to do something now. We need to find out what kind of change or development or whatever is acceptable to the town. Where does the town want to go with this? Where do they see it? And we need this information now. There is an urgency here that I don't get. You know, I understand it takes time to do it right and do it carefully and do it thoroughly. But that's not working.
I can appreciate that, and, you know, you have charged this committee, and then do it. I'm just telling you that what we are doing is already underway, and, you know, you are entitled to do this. I'm just telling you that we already started the master plan process, and it's unfortunate that there are 2 processes underway. I understand your concern, I understand the concern with taxes, and if that's how you feel is the best way to handle it, you're on the select board and you have the power to do that.
Is there a way that we could combine our visioning activities?
I think that's what was the attempt by Kevin, and Kevin, I thought, just was just terrific. I think that's what his goal was, and apparently that didn't work.
Well, no, I'm asking,
May I say something?
well, wait a minute, Nils. I'm asking you, is there a way we can combine our efforts?
I would imagine it's possible, but I can't speak for the whole board.
I see, okay.
But I would think it's certainly possible.
Nils?
Look, all we're trying to do is, the planning board has the sole authority to do the changes in the master plan. One would think that what we're doing would be assistance to them in helping to develop the town's opinions and attitudes and assemble some of the data. I mean, you can get it from state websites and stuff, but it would be good to have it, you know, organized and presented. Then the planning board's got to run with it or not. And if people don't like what the planning board's doing, then they got to run for the planning board. But the planning board has the authority to change the master plan. Our little committee does. But we can, and I think probably pretty effectively, do the visioning process, which is simply get people in a room and giving them a chance to express what they see, also presenting them with the facts, you know, what the per capita income is, how much of the land is used for this, where might likely development take place or not, and then let the planning board run with it. But it's you know, that's how I see this happening, and I'm in favor of making it happening faster. No, our charge from the selectmen was to get her done, and that's what we're trying to do. And I don't want to usurp anybody's authority. We don't have any authority except just to do what we're doing. The planning board has to run with this or not.
Yeah, I'm not sure, I mean, it's gratifying to hear that you're gonna do the housing chapter, because I personally think that's an important part of it, first. But, see, I don't quite understand, I mean, as we're doing what we're doing, we're simply a conduit for passing information on to the planning board. And so, I mean, in essence, we've raised funds to get this done. And now we're just trying to move on to that part of actually doing it. And when it's done, we hope that, you know, everyone in town, whether on the planning board or not, participates, and then we pass on the information to the planning board, and then they do with it what they do with it.
I agree.
So-
You are charged, it's not a planning board matter. You're charged by the select board, and that's your charge. And whatever the outcome of that will be the outcome.
And I think it's important that we communicate with each other to say, hey, this is what we're doing, and we hope, you know, if you want us to change the way we're doing it in some way, we can get the consultant and us all together and make sure that you're getting the information that you want to get out of it, so.
Yeah,
think
and
that's-
I think, you know, some of the issues have been raised, that, you know, the consultant, there was a feeling that, and I did watch the video of last week's meeting, and thank you.
You're welcome, John.
Yeah, probably Oscar-worthy film for next year. But there is concern about the, you know, having a steering committee kind of created at the end of the process instead of at the beginning, and having a very strong preference for a specific consultant, where it should really be the steering committee that's leading this. It's called a steering committee. So
Wait,
if
hold on just a
so
moment.
if you want feedback, there's some feedback.
The steering committee now, I think, is up around 30 people. So
And it's
that's a
30?
problem. It's up to 30.
Well, I get-
Earl wanted to speak.
Well, maybe we can get all 1,800 people on it.
Just to clarify my own fuzzy brain, that this committee, by and large, feels that it's a job that needs to get done not only correctly, but within a reasonable amount of time. Now, what I understand, the planning board talks about a master plan from 2006 and 2008.
No, not a master plan. That was the visioning and survey process.
All right, but I guess, how often, my question is, where do you people specifically stand in the development of your visioning and master plan at this given time?
We have a lot, we've done a lot of gathering of information, and I don't want to speak for the planning board. I can't.
Well,
But I can, what I would hope is probably about 6 months from getting started. I would hope. But
And how
that's
long-
not something I can be held
and how
to.
long have you people been working on gathering this information and preparing?
About 2 years.
2 years. Well, I just have a feeling that this group understands there is a lack of patience from getting this job done. If we can do it more rapidly, then I think that should be considered. If we can get information that, what are you trying to develop, a visioning, a master plan, or what?
A housing chapter for the master plan.
And where's the master plan stand in all this?
I'm not sure if I'm following your question.
Do we
It's
have
it's
Do we have a
2013.
master plan?
Yes,
2013.
2013?
yes.
And how often should that be updated?
The recommended time is every 5 to 10 years, and it's a recommendation.
And is there any plans to do that at this
That's what
point?
we're doing. It's a housing chapter.
doing
They're just starting with the housing chapter, or
They're doing
creating
one
the housing
chapter at a
chapter.
We're doing rolling chapters, which is authorized by statute.
All right, anyway.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment. I don't think you can build yourself out of the problems we have. I think more building is not
Okay.
the effective answer.
That's, we need to, all we are trying to accomplish is to find out what the wishes are of the entire community. We're not saying you gotta build it, you gotta buy it, you gotta, whatever. Let's find out what is the community's feeling on this, and then take it from there. So if it's housing, that's one thing. If it's businesses, that's something else. But let's find out. Mike?
Earlier you mentioned that Kevin Sarr was trying to bring people together. Having worked with Kevin for 6 months now,
Mhm.
I think he has the capacity to do it. And what do we need to do to make it possible to give Kevin the time to bring people together to try and work out the process, because my feeling is that it is, time is secondary to getting the sense of the community behind the process. If we can do it fast, great, but if we try and go too fast and we don't have the community behind it, it's not gonna go anywhere. And once you start down a track, you can't set deadlines and say, gotta do it here, gotta do it there, because you're dealing with 1,800 people, of which probably usually 300 or 400 people actually participate in this.
But you have to have goals.
Absolutely, but I'm saying that the most important goal is to get community buy-in,
Right.
and the timing is secondary to it. And I don't think we should get hung up on the timing, we should get hung up on how we bring in the community behind it.
Meg, you had something?
Yes, I would, Meg Sheehan from the Conservation Commission, I would reiterate that point, that it's more important to get the community buy-in than to try to shove something down people's throats, and I think a lot of people are already feeling that way. I also agree with everything that John said about the planning board, and I have trouble seeing how this committee is going to be able to develop recommendations that don't overlap or infringe on the planning board's charge in terms of the zoning bylaws and whatnot, and.
That you're way ahead of the process.
Okay, well, I'm just saying, you know, generally, I guess you're looking for general
You're 2 years
comments at
down
this
the
point.
road.
Well, I'm looking for general comments when I look at what the charge is, and I'm looking at the revised charge from March 18th, I feel like it is very one-sided. It's all about, we have to raise money, kind of a preordained conclusion that this is what we have to do. There's no mention of conservation in here, and looking at how conservation and open space does not cost the town anything. And I feel like it's all tied up in this, let's get rid of current use idea. And I think that there is gonna be a lot of pushback if we don't have a process that is inclusive. It can't be just one meeting on one Saturday when a lot of people are at sports events or whatever. I'd like to know how exactly you're gonna reach out to make sure that you give everyone the opportunity to have input and not just come to one-day visioning meeting. So I think there are some real concerns about the
No one
process.
has suggested a one-day visioning meeting.
Well, that's what I was hearing last week.
We said 2 or 3. No, we've always said 2 to 3, with plenty of notice and plenty of opportunity for everyone to be involved.
From the very
And
beginning,
we're not talking about current use or anything else. We're finding out where the community's at.
Well, I
If the
think
community says we don't wanna do anything, then that's the result that's gonna be handed. And I don't see how more input or more feedback is gonna hurt the planning committee. They do their own, we provide some. They can do with that data what they want.
I'm just saying, from just my coming into it at this point, it appears that the method for getting that input is biased and one-sided. I'd like to see an RFQ and not an RFP. I'd like to have it not be this preordained Arnett, who works for the chambers of commerce in the state. I mean, where's the conservation aspect of all of this? And where is like the kind of research that goes into a zoning bylaw to determine what the districts should be? I just think it's a very truncated process that's gonna be used to support a preordained conclusion.
And I guess we'll have to run the process to see.
Just from a process perspective, I think it'd be helpful to understand, because I'm a little confused. From the planning board's perspective, what I heard you say, John, is that there's an objective to build into this process a visioning process. Is that correct?
You mean with the master plan?
Yes.
Yeah, it's hard to do a master plan without feedback from the public.
Okay. So can you just lay out what your thinking is on the visioning process?
The visioning process that was done last time is pretty much the format that's established, which is.
So how is that visioning process different from the visioning process that the development committee is talking about?
It's related to their charge. I think to your point, Meg, and when, your charge is about taxes, or largely about taxes, right? Or-
That's, no, let me do, wait.
Yeah, maybe, because it's changed, I don't know, like 3 or 4 times, so it's hard to
Yeah,
keep track.
no, that's the
The
proposal.
most recent one.
Well, it's,
I mean,
the
I
charge
think-
is right there.
Just,
No,
just to
that's
build on
not
this,
the
I
charge.
think the first point that I heard, Sue, you made about the planning board is that the planning board feels that they own the visioning process. So if there's input that we need to think about how this process gets accelerated, why can't there be a conversation about that and let the process exist where it should be with the planning board?
The planning board does not have exclusive authority to do that.
I didn't say exclusive
They
authority,
just felt that the selectmen can do whatever they want, they can do whatever they want.
right, and Nils, to that point, and in full disclosure, one of the thoughts that I had shared is that in addition to the planning board, there need to be representatives from other boards that are involved as well. I mean, we've heard a voice from conservation, there's also zoning, budget, school, the Energy Commission, the Heritage Commission. Those people should be engaged in this process as well.
They were,
Well, they should show up at the meetings and tell us what they think. All we're trying to do is get people in the room and let them talk. I mean, that's it, that's all you're trying to do.
Yeah, I think, and this, you know, some people were here last time, some people have seen the video, some people have probably heard about the meeting. A lot of the focus of our last conversation builds on exactly what Mike was sharing. How do we create an inclusive process? And just listening to the conversation now and what's happened since that last meeting, particularly with respect to conversations that have gone on with the planning board, what I'm hearing is that there is a call for respecting the creation of an inclusive process. And my concern is that might be missing given the sense of urgency that exists around this issue as it relates particularly to the tax burden. So it seems to me that there just needs to be some reconciliation about how do we create an inclusive process that's accelerated and meets the criteria that Mike was describing.
Can I go back to my earlier comment that I'm looking at Kevin as a possible way? Where do we stand with Kevin trying to bring people together? I heard somebody say, well, it didn't work. What's the story?
I'd be happy to address that. I think, I agree with you 100% about Kevin. He was extremely effective at the meeting, and the planning board bought in. And I don't know what he had a meeting with the other members today, and we got a message through, he sent a message to the planning and zoning administrator that went out to all of us saying that it wasn't accepted by the select board.
what was asked of us was to accept all of these things, and our concern is the speed with which this gets done, okay, quite frankly. Now, let me say, if one of the things that was suggested is we have another joint meeting where we sit down with Kevin and have this out, and come see if we can work it out, work out a way to do
I think that'd
it,
be fine.
It's the only way you're gonna do it,
right?
face
So
to face.
that's
And
fine.
I think it'd be good to have, I think Kevin is an excellent facilitator.
Mhm.
It gets, it can get heated. You've had experience, and I've had
no.
experience where have you ever seen people get upset? It can get heated, and I think Kevin really does a pretty good, even-handed job of letting everybody be heard. He gets, up at the whiteboard, and,
it's great with the
yeah, you can see.
He loves his whiteboard.
Yeah, he loves the whiteboard, you can see the archaeological remains from the other day. And, under difficult circumstances, he got everybody, he herded the cats. So, look, the worst that can happen is that it doesn't work.
Okay. When can we get on your schedule?
I wish that I was dictator of the board, but my response is as soon as possible. I'll talk to David. I can't communicate with the other members of the board because of the committee handbook rules and the open, whatever it's called, laws. So I have to go through David Robbins. So I will go through David Robbins. He will communicate to everybody else. They will communicate to him, and we'll take it from there.
How does the rest of the committee feel about this?
Nothing to lose.
Everybody on board?
Yep.
Let me ask you one question.
No.
Unsaid in all this, it sounded like the select board were the ones who were opposed to what was being done. Am I reading it right or not?
Well, we're opposed to just giving it up, the whole process.
What are you giving up?
Eliminate the redundancy with a visioning process which shall remain with the planning board.
No, I think the distinction, having
That to me
been
said
there,
we're not gonna
I think
do
I
it.
can clarify that, is that the visioning remains with the planning board, because that's what we're doing now, and that's what we're authorized to do. But, you can call it research, but leave the visioning with the planning board. Just call it research.
That was one of the suggestions that did come out of the meeting, was that we will do a research project.
Yeah.
And we'll research with the town and communities and find out how their feelings are and what they would like to have in their town. And just not call it visioning, we'll just change the name and call it research.
I think
and do that would be okay?
that would be a good thing.
That would be a good thing, I see, okay.
To me, that's silly, because we're doing the same thing, we're just naming it.
That's okay.
I'd love to make a comment.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Emily.
Oh, thanks, Ray. I hope this is a constructive comment. I'm hearing a lot of similar themes and overlap. Phil's and Mike very persuasive on community buy-in, and I'll admit that's one of the reasons I came, is thinking, what exactly is this? I read a pamphlet at town meeting and said, what is this committee? And I just, first 2 pages, absolutely, the tax burden is high, this makes all the sense in the world, and here are some of the barriers to development, sure. And then, now here's what we're gonna do. Here's what development maybe should look like, here's what planning board should do. And so I was very concerned, and maybe it's too late for this, but if you want community buy-in, another way to frame this whole committee, and maybe a more productive way for this committee to be designed, which is also conveniently more separate from the planning board, is not a community on what should development look like, but a task force on understanding the tax challenges that are specific to Lyme and the solutions that may be available. And so that will include things like a broader and maybe more careful understanding of conservation and current use, which may or may not be a problem. It would also bring in things like budget committee, right? The tax problem is not just spending, not just revenue, it's also spending, right? And so thinking about the balance, and to the extent that you are going to do research with the town, which I'm an economist, I do a lot of research, great idea, get data. Shouldn't the research fundamentally be about what are the trade-offs we would like to make in terms of our taxes? This town, like all small rural districts, faces difficult choices, difficult trade-offs, and not all of those are easy. I think if the committee is restricted to what would the consequences or the composition of development be for the tax burden, that's too limited. The real problem is, how does the town get a little bit creative and focus in on the tax issues and talk with real data and real community values about what are the potential solutions there? And to be clear, that's not the planning board's mandate. The planning board is about the vision, and taxes are a piece of that. And you'd be carving out and saying, we really want to think hard about the tax piece. And development is of course a big piece of that, but it's not the only piece.
Can I interject? What you just articulated is exactly what we have been trying to do on our committee. You just nailed it.
Well, thank you. That's lovely. I would point out and that's great. I'm excited to hear that. The way this reads does not sound like let's think broadly about the tax issue on both the revenue and the cost side. It's what kind of businesses would we like and where would we like them and how do we
No, it
change
doesn't say that at
that?
all. What it says is that if you are going to raise
This.
revenue,
The charge,
The charge feels like, the charge feels like that, and I'm just saying, whether or not it is,
That's a fair
and
criticism.
I hope it's not, and look, you're all my neighbors, and I trust you very much, I believe you when you say that. The community buy-in's gonna be very difficult while the charge reads the way that it currently reads.
well, but our job what we have tried to do is just gather data, understand our tax base, there's more data to be gathered, and then the town needs to make a choice, okay? Once it's informed and understands what the choices are, it's got to essentially make a choice, and this is me speaking, not the committee. We got to figure out, do we want to be on Nantucket, where you got to be rich to live there, or do we want to make the fewest possible developments to town that will help our taxpayers and allow people who are not rich to continue to live here? There has to be a choice, but it has to be informed, and there's got to be a reasonable process where the people can be given the information and discuss it, and so that's all we're trying to do now is have that discussion as quickly as possible because of the rapidly rising tax bases. And I don't see why that has to be so difficult. I really don't.
Okay, Ray wanted to speak.
Well, a couple of comments, if I may. This is Ray Clark. Let's see, I've been around long enough to, I think, have been through 2 of the master plan revisions, and the one
You don't
in...
look that old.
Sorry?
You don't look that old.
Well, I don't know how I got a master plan from 1985, but I guess it was from being here, so.
I got one of those when I wasn't here, so.
Well, I was lucky. Let's see, the 06-08 vision statements, this is to you, Phil, were done in the format of a questionnaire. And I remember getting the questionnaire and thinking, the questions are very ambiguous, they're hard to answer. I wish it was phrased in a different way, but it wasn't. And let's say there were 85 questions. I think the total buy-in across the town was something like 35%, which probably left both the respondents and the people distributing the questionnaire very frustrated. I think doing a visioning process, as you're talking about, through committees, you're gonna have the same group that's here every time, and you're gonna get a very limited slice of the population. I think if you really want feedback, do what the US Census does. Go door to door. We've apparently got the money to do that, and we've got lots of volunteers who can participate. That's one comment. The second comment, in 1990, we proposed the Lyme Hill and Valley Association, which Mike Smith will remember, and maybe Earl as well, and maybe that's it. But it was an organization that I was on, Mike was on. It was committed to conservation. It was committed actually to development in a responsible way. And we bought up various properties around town. We limited the development so that it fit certain criteria. If there was housing, we tried to set it back off the road so that the view shed was preserved along the roads. I'm holding the front page of a proposal for planning services to design a new South Village. This was after 13 Dartmouth College Highway. This was in '94, and it was done by Bob White, who I'm told is still in business. And the concept was to develop a south village in the existing commercial district. And it fell apart for a variety of reasons, one of which had to do with the emergence of Crossroad, and Crossroads buying up the remaining land on the north side of the, west commercial district. But lava also, this kind of surprised me, because in going back through your files, you really forget so much stuff. But we did proposals on the east side commercial district as well. And the housing that was there, we bought. We put an option on it, and we put certain constraints on the development of it. And it ended up going to Sandy Kelsey, but there were proposals in here going way, way back to that period from Tom Heitzman, who was apparently at the time looking for a veterinary hospital, and also from none other than Bob Rusfold, who was looking to build a sort of local clinic, which he ended up building just a little closer into town.
If I could just add, this is Mike Smith, the two which we were most successful at was the farm at the south end of Brick Hill, the 200 acres, of which we were able to raise money, buy, and build 3 or 4 houses, which are there now. You don't even know that they fit in the community. The other, which I was most involved in, was the record farm, which in 2.5 weeks we raised $650,000 and bought it. As most of you know, I was in the printing business, but I built a road, Record Ridge Road, and we sold off 4 houses and preserved, we got $200,000 from the state and preserved 180 acres of land. And it was done. So this can be done, it has been done by the town, and there are ways of expanding the tax base without just building a road development or for business. I mean, unfortunately, as most of you know, I was in business. Lyme is not an area which attracts businesses. We can attract cottage industries if we ever have any internet. But anyway, that gives you, but it can be done, and there are people in town who can do it. And I think that this is where I will cycle back to creating, and this is where I think Kevin's strength is creating communications with people to bring people together. Because everybody's got to compromise a little bit, because we're all different. Fortunately, that's one of the great advantages of Lyme.
Can I move that the Lyme Community Development Committee and the Planning Board find a time in the very near time to meet and let Kevin be facilitator?
Absolutely. Second.
Second? What did you say?
Second. You said aye, right?
Aye.
All in favor?
Okay.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
A second thing that I'd like to do is, I'm sorry, I forgot your name.
Emily.
Emily. I thought Emily's point was well taken. If people misunderstand the charge as written,
The charge.
let's make sure the charge is really what we want to do. In fact, that was one of the questions I brought to the meeting tonight, to say, what do we want the outcome of some sort of a visioning process to be? Because that really didn't come up in the note we had, and so I think to have, I'm not sure if this is the right time, maybe it is. What should our charge say from the planning board? Is that
You're asking me? No.
No, I'm asking you.
I'm saying the select board, obviously Kevin and Rusty as well, are open. We will make this charge, we'll write the charge to make it work to do what we want it to do. Okay, if we need to change it, we'll change it.
I'm a little confused at this point in that, I think it's great we're gonna get together the planning board, I think that's a needed step, but beyond that, from the very first, this committee has always said, we're gonna create an open environment and do a visioning where we're gonna invite everyone in the community. It's not gonna be a Saturday afternoon during a sporting event issue, okay? We've already actually had a meeting, open meeting, just initially to introduce ourselves, where we came up with 100 people that we invited. I don't remember how many were there, 40 or 50. But we've always thought that this has to be an open process that involves the community. And with that, we all have, on the committee, we're all very animated by how to figure out how to stop the increasing in taxes. And we have our ideas of how to do that. At the same time, the visioning process, we all know, might end up with people saying, you know what? We can't agree on how we want to do this. We're kind of okay with the way things are. And that's a possibility on the outcomes.
How did you decide who you were going to invite? I was never invited.
Okay, excuse me. John?
What did you want to answer?
Huh?
No, this meeting you had.
We got together and we just brainstormed with everyone that we knew we thought might be interested. And I'm sorry you didn't get on the list, but it's just an initial thing to kind of feel if the community would be interested in a visioning process. And so, but the whole thought the whole time was to invite everyone that we could possibly think throughout the entire process to get folks to tell us what they think. You know, you've already made it clear that you don't think we can develop our way out of the tax situation. Those are the type of things that we hope people will come to the visioning process to say, and then to give us alternatives. If we can't develop our way out of it, how are we gonna deal with it? Or is there any way to deal with it?
I have plenty of alternatives.
Yeah.
I could bring the tax base to 0 here.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So we hope during the visioning process, if it does come to be, that you come and help us with all this, so.
I mean,
Well, I don't think that the various committees in this town are contentious. Their behavior is ridiculous. They don't wanna work together. They all have a problem with ownership. And that's a big problem in this town, is that people cannot sit down and be neighborly about this. This is crazy.
Well, Duncan, this is our attempt to get over that hurdle.
Well, good.
So we're gonna try hard.
Sorry. Oh, no, go.
You know, getting back to your charge and as it's laid out in your RFP, or it relates to it, I think one of the flaws, if I can say that, is that there's nothing that I read that deals with the net tax impact.
Correct.
Everything's always discussed as, do you want a development here, do you want a development there? And we discussed this when you were with the board. What I think is valuable information isn't just, you know, the questions like, where would you like a development? You like it here, would you like it there? I think in order for people to have an informed ability to answer those questions, you have to address what is the net impact of development? Not just, oh, we'll get this amount of increased tax revenue from this. What's the impact on roads, traffic, safety, schools, emergency services, quality of life issues, and any other town services? Those have to be, I mean, I think what you need is a study about how to deliver that information, and it will inform this committee about how to frame the question, which isn't just about, let's have a development here, let's have one there. It's what, and one of the, okay, I'm getting ahead of myself, but you need to be able to explain to people what the trade-offs are. And I'll tell you, my frustration when I looked back on the questionnaire, and you kind of touched on this, Ray, is the questions were kind of simplistic. And I don't know how you do this, but to have questions that say, You know, if you want this, are you willing to give up that? Because that's what we're talking about here. Where is this sweet spot that the town wants? And just, you know, putting out these generic questions that are very lineal and limited doesn't do it. And I don't know what the solution is, but you need to be able to get answers to what are you willing to give up to get this?
Yeah. If I may pick up, that's exactly right and exactly my thought on, you know, how do you structure the question to solve the problem that the select board and all of us, I think, would like to solve, which is that taxes are high and rising. To be clear, not just in Lyme. I just talked with a good friend of mine on the Lebanon School Board. My mother's on the Orford School Board. My father is trustee in Orford. We all have tax problems. This is not unusual. But we all have trade-offs. So what would be really valuable to the town, first and foremost, even before we get to community values and visioning and surveys, is let's have some data. We discuss this a lot among my demographic of friends and colleagues in Lyme who are smart folks but don't have a lot of data, and we sort of ask ourselves these questions. What would be the net impact of generic housing development? How about senior housing? Because of course the demographics within houses matter enormously, as we know, for the net tax burden. What about a business? Does it depend what kind of business it is and where it is? Of course, absolutely. But can I compare these things without research? No. And of course the correct research there is not, I'm afraid to ask the town, because crowdsourcing is great, but I suspect many people do not have the data for this. But
That's where the consultant comes in.
Exactly.
The research has already been done. The research has all been done by 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 towns that have the same problem we have.
Yeah, and right, so I would like to see, and I have seen some meta-analyses, this is true, on different pieces of this. I'm not sure I've seen a meta-meta. I've seen a meta on, you know, current use and a meta on, you know, particular kinds of development, but point well taken. A meta-meta that's specific for Lyme or tailored to Lyme would be valuable. But then, when we have that research, that's when presumably you go to the town and say, now, as John says, what are the trade-offs that are consistent with town values? Because otherwise the concern goes straight back to, one, we might not get our decision right, whatever that is, we the people, the democracy like, and two, on Mike's really important first point on buy-in, that buy-in needs to be there because gosh, the worst thing that can happen is you write a survey where the questions, whether or not they're intended to be, appear to be framed in a particular direction. And then, boy, not only do we have not good answers, but we also have more contention in the town among neighbors, which is something nobody wants.
Like Orford just did. We hadn't even talked about a survey.
Absolutely.
So, you know, we haven't even addressed that issue
Yeah.
yet. That's where I think a consultant comes in and tells us, do you want to do it or not?
Yeah.
Somewhere in the last 20 years, we had this academic discussion, and it came up that there are professionals who know how to write questions for questionnaires.
Absolutely.
And we actually made contact with somebody at Dartmouth who
I
was.
work with many of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And.
So there's our contact.
Yeah, and the problem is, all of us approach this with a bias.
Yeah.
I mean, every one of us, we can't walk out the door without it. So, I really think that if we're going to do a questionnaire, we want to spend our money, we need to spend it on somebody who can be an unbiased developer of a good questionnaire.
Yeah.
And then you have to defend it because everybody's gonna come in with their biases and try and modify it. So, leave it, I mean, but that's, I would really.
Can I say something at this point? Phil Barta was very kind and helped work. I took a crack at an RFP, and then Phil edited it, and we came up with something, and it's not perfect. I wish it was one page, but there it is. I don't know what, our group should have seen that by now. Is that what we want to put out? What's the timing of that? And, you're right, we need a consultant, we need somebody. We don't have $50,000, and we got $15,000. And so, unless the select board is willing to vote some big amount of money,
No.
we kind of have to go with what we got. And I'd like to proceed and get that out there. Somebody at our previous meeting said there's a website where we can post this to attract consultants. And then Ann Duncan Cooley was going to help me, put it out where you put these things to get them. But can we have some discussion about that issue?
Yes, we'll get to that very shortly. One more, Meg?
Well, I think that might be jumping the gun, because what I just heard in response to what Mr. Stadler and Emily said about the net tax impact was an agreement, I think you indicated, Sue, that the select board would be willing to go back and redo the charge to have a charge that was more tailored towards that. What is the net impact? So we have that information. So now we have an RFP that is for the old charge. And then as a member of the steering committee, at least one of the original ones who signed up 2 weeks ago, we haven't had a meeting yet. And if we're the steering committee and we're being asked to provide input on the RFP, which I think should be an RFQ, et cetera, but how can we be asked to work on that without having a meeting to talk about the RFP and whether we agree on it?
Well, it occurred to me that if we're going to have a steering committee, the steering committee also needs a charge and needs to have some guidelines as to what their goal is, what they're trying to do, right? I mean, because.
It flows from the charge from the select
Right.
board to
Right.
this committee, and then I guess this committee has a charge for the steering committee? Which
So-
they all need to
so-
be done before we can vote on any RFP, I would think.
So, I'd like to propose we use the notion of what we talked about here as a basis of coming up with the request for proposal. I think we can't send a request for proposal out until we get very clear what it is we're asking for. We talked, there's some goals here. I think some of the things that people said today that were very important, we need to invite the whole community, create open events for everyone to come to. There have to be many of them. We talked about some of the topics. The original thought was taxes. That's clearly a very important question. But there's a lot more. There's net tax impact that certainly we want the visioning process, we want the discussion that happens in these open meetings to touch on net tax impact. One of the questions I brought to this meeting is, do we want it to talk about housing? And that's a question that we can choose to address or not. I would say, yes, let's talk about housing. Do we want to talk about millennials? The fact, is it important for Lyme to attract millennials to town? Do we want to talk about, I think it's a fair question, because
Well,
I think we should.
I don't see how you can even look at the RFP unless you have an accurate charge from the board of the
Well, what is,
selectmen.
I guess my question is it a steering committee or not? I mean,
So,
it seems
no, we're not-
like the
I'm not
steering
talking
committee
about the
is,
steering
is
committee.
is like irrelevant.
When we have, I say we should focus on getting an RFP I say we should focus on getting a clear description of what we want the outcome.
But isn't that what the
We don't want the
subcommittee, isn't that what
outcommittee.
what a steering committee should be doing?
And just to, you
Possibly, yeah.
mentioned in the RFP,
Yeah.
just to take a point,
Mhm.
that you would ask people, what is the net impact? Well, as Emily eloquently explained, how can I go to a meeting and say the net tax impact of development or of this or that on the town
Mhm.
is such when I, Joe citizen, don't know what it is?
Okay,
So you need the research to say, this is the net tax impact of all these different things. It doesn't matter whether millennials, we want millennials to come to town. We're talking about a tax impact or not. What is it? What is the net tax impact?
And as Lebanon found out, they went through all the research and it was completely wrong once they built a project. And so, as Doug and I pointed out, the research is out there. You know, our particular town's gonna have some unique things to it, but it's not gonna be significantly different, the research, even if we were to have it done for specific to Lyme than what a lot of these towns are. And so, to me, it's like, it's an unknowable thing. What is the net? It's unknowable. We have some good ideas because we can look at other towns' experiences when they build, or they don't build, or whatever they do. We can see what happened there, and that gives us somewhat of an idea of what might happen in Lyme. But it's an unknowable thing. What I think this committee has always tried to do is say, let's put some ideas out there. Let's invite the town in to give us their ideas. Let's think about how we can move forward. That's all we're trying to do. I'm not sure how this has become a committee that's supposed to come up with all the answers, because I never thought that we could possibly come up with answers. I thought at best we can do is come up with some questions. So.
Bill?
I was just gonna add a couple of thoughts. One is that I think a lot of the problem stems from the charge and its focus on development. To a point that was made earlier, we're not looking at the other side of the ledger. I know that there's been conversations that have happened in recent years with the budget committee involving the select board about looking at the cost side. I think that's something that the town should have the opportunity to weigh in on through an inclusive process here. We shouldn't take that off the table as had been suggested. So I think we just need to start.
I don't think anybody suggested it. I entirely.
Nils, no, you certainly did not. It was a member of the select board that suggested that, don't worry about the cost side, we got that figured out. Right? And I think that's where some of the trouble from this stems, is that there's kind of like, it kind of reads as an implicit bias to what the charge is for the committee through this process. I would also agree with the point that was made by Meg in that, you know, I think the RFP gets thrown out based on what I heard an amendment to process being, in that Kevin comes in and facilitates a conversation with the planning board and the community development committee. So I think that takes that part of the process back to square one.
Well, may I just say that none of us have approached the actual numbers to the extent that what's costing us the most in this town. And it's clearly that it's education. Now, nobody seems to want to talk about that. And you know, I think our children are very important. I think it's terrific for us to give them the best education we possibly can. I think that's our mandate in life. However, within that framework, we have an escalating problem with insurance. So we're not talking in this meeting, and we're not talking in town about the underlying problems of our tax situation. And education makes up approximately 2/3 of our tax bill.
All right.
Now, okay, I
Agreed.
just want to bring that up.
Right,
Because
agreed.
we can't build our way out of this. If we try to build our way out of this, we're going to bring a lot more children in here, and that's not going to help us.
Okay. But in the interest of time, let's back up and say, all right, what's the next step? The next step is we redo the charge again and try to build it to look at all issues in town. My guess.
I think maybe the next step would be the joint meeting with the planning board, because I'm starting to get uncomfortable when, I don't think our committee is capable or even really wants to look at everything, okay? I think that our original thought and our original charge was to look at the revenue side, not the expense side. There's a budget committee, there's all sorts of committees that look at the other side. I thought that our charge was to look at the revenue side.
But
And
I think really that's where a lot of the confusion and the problems stem from. That was your charge, and then it became a visioning process. And when those two get conflated, that's why you're having the problems you're having.
And
Well,
may
one
I
goes
add,
with another.
may I add, I don't think you have to open Pandora's box necessarily. A useful way to separate problems, so I agree, this can become super big. And you don't wanna be the town commission on how we spend our money either. So suppose you take current spending as fixed, and then you say, let's talk about ways that we fund that current level of spending going forward. And of course, you could reduce that, or you could expand it to separate questions, not for this committee.
I'm not saying reduce it.
What, sure,
I'm
yeah,
just saying contain it.
contain, sure, fair enough, but that, basically, let's set that aside and say, okay, composition of that immaterial, even level, let's just set that aside and say, okay, what are ways to tackle that? And what are the trade-offs inherent in that tackling? What I heard pretty clearly from John, and I've heard from other folks, and it just makes plain sense, is some kinds of development increase the tax burden at the same time that they increase the revenue. So anytime, any proposal for let's build our way, whether it's business or housing or something else, should, it seems obvious to me, be based on net tax impact, right? Because if the charge of the select board is let's holding current spending fixed, understand different ways that we could potentially bring down our tax rates, right? Then you would always want to think in net tax terms of any changes in local zoning.
Is that not what a consultant would help us figure out and help us do?
I think so. The one thing I will say is, as soon as I walked in and I read this, I said, before I even finished the first sentence, there's a clear need to increase the, and I inserted here, net tax base in Lyme to relieve, because I said, well, gosh, let's make sure we're not thinking in gross terms versus net, because that would be a very expensive error indeed.
We all recognize that.
Yeah.
You know, we all recognize that, and we have a lot of issues. Okay, so going forward, we're gonna relook at the charge. We're going to meet with the planning board, to have Kevin facilitate us. And then relook at the RFP. Based on that, we're gonna meet in 2 weeks again. While you're away.
While I'm away.
What, well, no, while he was away, we made it every 2 weeks. Chris, you wanted to say?
I'm not as eloquent and as soft as some of the people at this table in the audience. I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated that we've been doing this for 6 or 8 months and we're not clear as a charge. I agree that we thought it was revenue side. We've been working on that for 6 months. Frustrated, and I appreciate all the hard work that everybody does, but that planning committee pushed back to a bunch of volunteers who thought we were doing the right thing. And the pushback was pretty evident. So if we're gonna get together and we're gonna work through this, people have to change, you know, their attitude about what we're trying to do together. I think we're trying to throw ideas out and see what the community wants. So I guess I just ask everybody, let's not waste each other's time. Let's get the chart clear so that we can move forward and get things done.
I think the feeling is mutual on both ends about the pushback. And I think that's why it's valuable to have Kevin as a facilitator. I think there's a lot of frustration on the other side as well. So I think that's why we need somebody to help us work through that.
I don't think you should be frustrated with the committee. The charge and how this has all been put together maybe, but we're just people trying to come up with some ideas.
Not at all, no, I'll tell you for myself, I appreciate immensely the time you all put in. The process,
Needs to be
yes,
fixed.
absolutely. The process has been very frustrating for us.
Okay.
Let me emphasize the appreciation for your time and efforts. That's a totally different issue.
Okay, so we have a plan to move forward. We're gonna have another development committee meeting.
Sue, can I say something?
Yes,
For you?
you're only the chair, go ahead.
Yeah. I appreciate it. Thank you for everybody. I thought this was a great session. Looking at this from 30,000 feet, we're really doing something here. I think everybody's of goodwill, and I think everybody wants to get to the same finish line together. I think that this was a very productive discussion. All I would caution is that let's keep it going forward with some speed. And if we bog, I'm going to be pushing anything forward as fast as we possibly can. You have to allow everybody to have their say, and everybody to, when you go into something like this, you don't know what the right answer is. You just don't know. You've got to ask a lot of people. The more people you ask, the better result that you are going to get. I understand that. It's not my first rodeo. But let's not bog down in procedural stuff that we're walking through molasses here. Let's go forward, and let our committee agree that if we're not making progress, we're going to move forward. We're going to move forward. That's all I can say. Thank you.
Meg, last words.
Steering committee, I just wanna know, am I on it, not on it, who's on it,
Well,
what do we
let's
need?
wait and hold off on the steering committee until we figure out what the committee is.
Okay, fair enough, thank you.
But we want people here.
Okay,
So please come,
okay,
all ideas are welcome.
okay, great, thank you.
And can I say this? Martha Becca we need more ladies at these meetings. And Martha Becca has given a list of, people who love women in town who are on the various committees and so forth. I'm going to reach out to them if nobody has an objection and encourage, we just have to have balance here,
Yeah,
We're up 300%.
right, we'll work on that.
All right.
Thank you, Nils.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night,
Thank you.
I'm gonna hang up on you.
Emily, Blanchard, but first.